The broadside cannons roared across black water, tearing through the pre-dawn silence of Port Royal harbour with flame and thunder. Spanish merchantmen exploded in splinters and screaming iron as the crimson-sailed frigates swept between their moorings like judgment itself. Men stumbled from taverns and brothels, half-dressed and wild-eyed, to witness the spectacle of destruction unfolding in the anchorage. Above the carnage, standing motionless at the helm of La Sangre del Diablo, Captain Erasmus Redmond watched the harbour burn with eyes the colour of winter seas. His coat, dyed the deep scarlet of arterial blood, moved like a wound against the gunpowder smoke. They called him the Red Captain, and across every shipping lane from Cartagena to Charlestown, that name carried more weight than Spanish doubloons or English sterling. Gold had made him powerful beyond the dreams of common pirates. Fear had made him something else entirely. Subscribe below and tell us where you're watching from. We sail these waters together. The attack on Port Royal was not plunder but demonstration. Redmond's crew had taken 3 Spanish treasure galleons in as many months, accumulating wealth that would have satisfied any dozen pirate crews for a lifetime. But satisfaction was a luxury the Red Captain could not afford. Power, he understood, required constant reinforcement. Fear required fresh blood. "Captain, the harbour-master's sloop is making for open water," called Tobias Marsh, the ship's quartermaster, a scarred Welshman whose loyalty was purchased not with gold, but with the promise of violence. Redmond raised one gloved hand. "Let them run. Let them carry word of what they witnessed here." The frigate's guns fell silent. In the sudden absence of thunder, men could hear the smaller sounds, timbers groaning, ropes creaking, the distant screaming from shore. Redmond turned from the carnage and descended to his cabin, where chests of Spanish gold sat stacked like promises of immortality. He had learned early that gold opened doors, bought men, secured harbours. But gold alone inspired only greed. Fear inspired obedience. The cabin smelled of beeswax, gunpowder, and the peculiar mustiness of old maps. Charts covered his table, not the crude sketches common to pirate vessels, but precise Portuguese navigational documents stolen from a cartographer's estate in Recife 3 years prior. Redmond traced a finger along the Lesser Antilles, calculating routes, weighing probabilities. The Spanish had put a bounty of 10,000 pieces of 8 on his head. The English had matched it. Even the French, despite their nominal alliance with freebooters operating from Tortuga, had begun to whisper that the Red Captain had become more liability than asset. None of this troubled him. What troubled him was the silence. For 6 months, no rival captain had challenged his supremacy. No naval squadron had attempted pursuit. The governor of Jamaica had stopped issuing letters of marque against him, as if Redmond existed beyond the reach of law entirely. This vacuum of opposition felt less like victory than like the eye of a hurricane, temporary calm before greater violence. "You're thinking too much again, Captain." The voice belonged to Magdalena de Torres, a Spanish noblewoman who had chosen exile over widowhood after Redmond's men had sacked her family's plantation on the Orinoco Delta. She served now as navigator and translator, her motivations opaque even after 2 years aboard La Sangre del Diablo. Men who think too much hesitate. Men who hesitate die. Redmond looked up from his charts. Men who don't think become food for sharks. Then perhaps the ocean will claim you either way. It was the kind of exchange they had grown accustomed to, verbal fencing without resolution. Magdalena understood navigation and spoke 7 languages. She also understood something about the Red Captain that few others did. His power was a performance, and performances required audiences. Without witnesses to his brutality, without survivors to spread tales of his ruthlessness, Erasmus Redmond was merely another pirate with stolen gold. The attack on Port Royal changed the political calculus across the Caribbean. Colonial governors from Barbados to Havana convened emergency sessions. The Spanish viceroy in Cartagena authorized privateer captains to hunt Redmond without quarter. The English Admiralty dispatched HMS Vengeance, a fourth-rate ship of the line with 48 guns, and a captain renowned for his mercilessness toward pirates. But Redmond had already moved. La Sangre del Diablo vanished into the maze of the Lesser Antilles, sheltering in coves known only to smugglers and escaped slaves. His crew, 87 men of a dozen nationalities, each motivated by greed or desperation or the peculiar freedom that life beyond law provided, began to whisper among themselves. The whispers started in the ship's hold, where men slept in hammocks strung between cannon placements. Jonas Blackwood, an English deserter who had joined the crew in Nassau, spoke in low tones to his bunkmate, a Portuguese gunner named Faria. "The captain's lost his edge. We sit here rotting while the Spanish consolidate. We should be taking prizes, not hiding like rats." Faria spat into the darkness. "You say this now, but when the Red Captain put that French privateer to the sword last summer, you cheered loudest of all. That was then. We had momentum. Now we have gold we cannot spend, and enemies who multiply while we sit idle." The conversation spread like fever through the lower deck. Some agreed with Blackwood, others defended the captain's caution, but everyone felt the tension of wealth ungained and danger unconfronted. Pirate crews were democracies of violence. Captains ruled by consent, and consent could be withdrawn. Tobias Marsh heard the whispers and brought them to Redmond's attention one humid evening as they sat in the captain's cabin sharing rum from Spanish bottles. Blackwood stirring the men, talking about taking a vote. New captain, new course. Redmond poured another measure of rum, his expression unchanged. "What does Blackwood want?" "To sail north, hit the shipping lanes between Charlestown and Boston. Says northern merchants are fat with goods and light on guns." "Blackwood is a fool. Northern waters mean English Navy patrols. We'd be hunted before we took our first prize." "Perhaps. But the men are restless. They shipped with the Red Captain for gold and glory. Lately they've seen neither." Redmond stood and walked to the stern windows, watching moonlight scatter across the bay. He had anticipated this. Mutiny was always a possibility aboard pirate vessels, the price of democratic governance among criminals. What surprised him was the timing. They had more gold than most crews accumulated in 5 years of raiding. Yet here was Blackwood, agitating for more. Perhaps that was the paradox at the heart of piracy. Gold provided power, but power demanded constant validation through action. The moment you stopped taking, stopped fighting, stopped inspiring fear, you became obsolete. "Gather the crew tomorrow at noon," Redmond said quietly. "We'll put it to a vote." Marsh looked genuinely surprised. "Captain, you could simply hang Blackwood. Make an example." "No. Let them vote. Let them see what democracy looks like." The next day, under a cloudless Caribbean sky, 87 men assembled on the main deck of La Sangre del Diablo. Redmond stood at the stern rail in his crimson coat, Magdalena beside him, Marsh to his left. The quartermaster called for order. "Jonas Blackwood has challenged the captain's command. By articles of this crew, such challenges require a vote. Speak your piece, Blackwood." The English deserter stepped forward, squinting in the brutal sunlight. He was younger than most aboard, perhaps 25, with the lean hunger of someone who had never been satisfied with anything. "The Red Captain brought us gold, true enough, but what good is gold we can't spend? Every port from here to New England knows our ship. Every navy wants our necks. We sit in this cove like prisoners while the Spanish rebuild and the English sharpen their swords. I say we need new leadership, someone willing to take risks again." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Redmond let them build before speaking. "Blackwood speaks of risks. Let me speak of consequences." His voice carried without shouting. a technique learned in years of commanding men in howling gales. Last month, Captain Thorne of the Black Phoenix tried raiding Charleston. The Royal Navy caught him in the harbor. They hanged his entire crew, 43 men, and left them swinging for the gulls. 2 weeks ago, the Spanish captured the Revenge off Cartagena. They burned the crew alive in the public square as entertainment for the viceroy. He paused, letting the images settle. We have gold because we are patient. We have our lives because we are careful. Blackwood wants glory. Glory is what gets you hanged. Or wealthy beyond measure, Blackwood shot back. You made your fortune on bold action, Captain. Now you preach caution. Perhaps you've grown comfortable. Perhaps the Red Captain has lost his color. The challenge hung in the tropical air like a blade. Redmond descended from the stern rail and walked slowly through the assembled crew until he stood directly before Blackwood. You want bold action? Very well. I propose we take the treasure fleet. Silence crashed over the deck like a rogue wave. Even Blackwood paled. The Spanish treasure fleet, Redmond continued, sails from Cartagena in 3 weeks. 12 ships carrying the combined wealth of Peru and New Spain. Galleons loaded with silver, gold, emeralds, pearls, protected by warships and 1,000 soldiers. They say it's impossible to take. They said the same about Port Royal. Magdalena's hand touched his elbow. A subtle warning. Marsh looked stricken. But Redmond pressed on. We vote now, Blackwood's way, raiding fat merchants and running from Navy patrols. Or my way, one prize so rich it sets us all up as kings, or kills us in the attempt. Show of hands. The vote was not close. Blackwood's proposal received 13 hands. Redmond's received 68. 6 men abstained. It's settled then, Redmond announced. We prepare for the treasure fleet. As the crew dispersed, Magdalena pulled Redmond aside. You've lost your mind. The treasure fleet has never been successfully attacked by a single ship. Never. Which is precisely why they won't expect it. Expectations don't stop cannon fire. This isn't strategy, Erasmus. This is suicide dressed in scarlet. He turned to face her fully. What would you have me do? Sit here until Blackwood finds 12 more men willing to slit my throat? Fade into obscurity while the world forgets the Red Captain existed? Fear isn't passive, Magdalena. Fear must be fed. And if you fail, then the ocean claims me, as you said it would. Preparation consumed the next 2 weeks. Redmond sailed to Tortuga under cover of darkness, purchasing intelligence from French spies who had infiltrated the Spanish colonial administration. The treasure fleet would consist of 12 vessels, 8 merchantmen heavy with cargo, 4 warships for protection. They would sail northeast from Cartagena, following the trade winds through the Windward Passage before turning east toward Spain. The key, Redmond's informants revealed, was timing and location. The fleet would anchor for 2 days at a small island called Santa Lucia to take on fresh water before the Atlantic crossing. The island had a single natural harbor, narrow and deep. If La Sangre del Diablo could reach Santa Lucia first and position herself correctly, she might isolate and overwhelm individual galleons before the warships could respond effectively. It requires precision, Magdalena admitted as they studied the charts together, and luck, mostly luck. Fear creates luck, Redmond replied. When men believe you're invincible, they hesitate. Hesitation is our advantage. He was not wrong about his reputation. Across the Caribbean, the name of the Red Captain carried talismanic power. Spanish sailors made the sign of the cross when his ship was mentioned. English merchants paid premiums to hire armed escorts. French colonial governors kept their harbor defenses manned around the clock, just in case the crimson-sailed frigate appeared on the horizon. This reputation was Redmond's greatest weapon and his greatest vulnerability. It meant his enemies always expected the unexpected, which sometimes translated to being prepared for anything. But it also meant his enemies sometimes overcorrected, seeing threats where none existed, wasting resources on phantom defenses. La Sangre del Diablo reached Santa Lucia 3 days before the treasure fleet's scheduled arrival. Redmond positioned the frigate in a concealed cove on the island's windward side, masts camouflaged with palm fronds, crew confined to whispered communication. They would wait like predators in ambush. On the evening of the second day, the lookout spotted sails. 12 vessels, precisely as intelligence had predicted, entering the harbor in formation. The merchantmen anchored close to shore, while the warships took protective positions at the harbor mouth. Redmond gathered his officers in the stern cabin. "We wait until midnight. The watch will be relaxed after days at sea. We row 2 longboats to the largest merchantman, the one flying the Viceroy's pennant. Tobias, you lead the boarding party. Take 30 men, kill silently, secure the cargo hold, and be ready to cut anchor when I give the signal." "And you, Captain?" Marsh asked. "I'll be creating a diversion." The plan was madness dressed as strategy, but madness had served Erasmus Redmond well throughout his career. At midnight, with the moon hidden behind clouds, 2 longboats slipped from the hidden cove and crossed the black water toward the Spanish anchorage. Redmond watched them go, then turned to his remaining crew. "Load the bow chasers with chain shot. When I give the word, we sail straight between the warships and hit them both with everything we have. Our goal isn't to sink them, it's to panic them, make them fire blindly at each other. Confusion is our ally." One of the younger crew members, a boy from Barbados who had joined only months earlier, spoke up nervously. "Captain, what if they don't panic?" Redmond smiled without warmth. "Then we die gloriously, and the ballad singers will have material for years." The attack commenced at midnight. La Sangre del Diablo swept from her hiding place under full sail. Crimson canvas, bright even in darkness, and drove directly toward the gap between the 2 Spanish warships. Both vessels, caught completely unprepared, scrambled to bring guns to bear. Redmond's bow chasers fired first, chain shots screaming through rigging and severing stays on both Spanish vessels. Sails collapsed, men shouted in confusion. Then Redmond's gunners unleashed the broadside cannons, not at the warships, but at the water between them, creating enormous geysers that obscured vision and gave the impression of multiple attacking vessels. In the chaos, the Spanish warships opened fire wildly, some of their shots striking each other in the darkness. Meanwhile, Tobias Marsh's boarding party had reached the Viceroy's merchantman. They climbed the anchor chain in silence, slit the throats of 4 watchmen before anyone could raise alarm, and swept through the ship like a plague. Within 15 minutes they controlled the vessel. But success created new problems. As Marsh's men attempted to cut the anchor cable and sail the prize away, one of the other merchantmen finally raised alarm. Church bells began ringing from the island's small mission. Musket fire erupted. The Spanish warships, recovering from their initial confusion, began maneuvering to trap both La Sangre del Diablo and the captured merchantman in the harbor. Redmond stood at his helm, calculating angles and wind. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the trap closed completely. "Magdalena, can we make the northern passage?" She consulted her charts by lantern light. "It's coral reef. Ships this deep have never attempted it. We'll rip our hull open." "Better than Spanish cannons, Tobias!" he shouted across the water toward the captured vessel. "Follow us through the North Passage. Dump cargo if you run aground." What followed was navigation by faith and desperation. La Sangre del Diablo threaded between coral formations, visible only as slightly darker shadows beneath the surface. Her keel scraped twice, wood groaning in protest, but the frigate's shallow draft saved her. Behind them, Marsh piloted the heavier merchantman through the same passage, throwing gold ingots and silver bars overboard to lighten the vessel when she threatened to ground. The Spanish warships, with their deeper keels, could not follow. They fired blindly into the darkness, shots splashing uselessly into the reef. By dawn, both pirate vessels had reached open water, carrying treasure estimated at over 200,000 pieces of eight. The crew of La Sangre del Diablo erupted in celebration. Men danced on deck, drank themselves senseless, fired pistols into the air. Jonas Blackwood, humbled and impressed, offered Redmond a formal apology. "I was wrong, Captain. You're still the devil himself." But Redmond felt no triumph. Standing at the stern rail as they sailed north toward Tortuga, he understood that this victory had fundamentally altered the political landscape. Before, he had been one pirate among many. Dangerous, yes, but manageable. Now he had directly humiliated the Spanish crown, stolen the viceroy's personal cargo, and demonstrated that even the treasure fleet could be plundered. Magdalena understood it too. "You've crossed a line," she said quietly. "They'll come for you now with everything they have. Not bounty hunters, not privateers, admirals and generals. Let them come. Fear is a currency that appreciates with use, or consumes its own holder." Word of the Santa Lucia raid spread across the Caribbean like wildfire. In taverns from Port-au-Prince to San Juan, men spoke in awed whispers of the Red Captain's audacity. Spanish colonial authorities met in emergency session, demanding military action. The English saw an opportunity. If they could capture Redmond, they might curry favor with Spain and eliminate a threat simultaneously. Admiral Sir Christopher Wells, commanding HMS Vengeance and a squadron of 3 smaller warships, received orders to hunt the Red Captain to the ends of the earth and the depths of hell if necessary. Wells was a career naval officer who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of maritime warfare. He did not believe in the supernatural reputation of pirates. He believed in superior firepower and disciplined crews. Wells studied everything known about Erasmus Redmond. The Red Captain favored speed over armor, audacity over caution. He sheltered in pirate havens, Tortuga, Nassau, certain coves along the Honduras coast. He needed to resupply, to spend his stolen wealth, to recruit new crew members. These necessities created patterns, and patterns created vulnerabilities. "We won't chase him across the ocean," Wells told his officers. "We'll poison his sanctuaries, cut him off from support until he has nowhere left to hide." The admiral began systematically destroying pirate infrastructure throughout the Caribbean. He bombarded Tortuga's harbor defenses, forcing the French governor to expel all known pirate crews. He blockaded Nassau, starving the pirate republic into submission. He paid informants in every port, creating a network of eyes watching for the crimson-sailed frigate. Redmond felt the noose tightening. Ports that had welcomed him now turned him away. Suppliers who had provided gunpowder and canvas suddenly had nothing to sell. Former allies developed convenient memory lapses when asked for shelter. The vast wealth from Santa Lucia meant nothing if he couldn't access civilization to spend it. "We need a permanent base," Marsh argued during a council meeting in the captain's cabin. "Somewhere the Navy can't reach, the Mosquito Coast perhaps, or one of the uninhabited Grenadines." "Isolation is slow death," Redmond countered. "We need access to markets, shipyards, recruits. The moment we retreat to the wilderness, we become irrelevant. The moment we show ourselves in civilized waters, we're sunk," Magdalena added. "Wells has 4 ships to our 1. He can afford to lose 3. We can't afford to lose anything." The strategic impasse festered like an infected wound. Weeks passed. Supplies dwindled. The crew grew restless again, not with ambition this time, but with fear. They had gold, but couldn't spend it. They had freedom, but nowhere to exercise it. They had followed the Red Captain to the pinnacle of pirate achievement, only to discover the pinnacle was a trap. Then intelligence arrived from an unexpected source. A French privateer captain, operating under letters of marque from Saint-Domingue, met Redmond at a neutral rendezvous point south of Hispaniola. The Frenchman brought news. Admiral Wells was resupplying in Bridgetown, Barbados. His squadron would depart in 10 days for a patrol of the Windward Islands, but Wells himself would travel separately aboard HMS Vengeance, taking a direct route to Antigua to meet with the colonial governor. "For 2 days," the French captain explained, "your English nemesis will sail alone, just his fourth rate and whatever escort ships happen to be in the area. If you wanted revenge, this would be your moment." Redmond studied the charts. Barbados to Antigua, open water, a straight run of approximately 200 miles. If he positioned himself correctly along the likely route, he might intercept Wells before any reinforcements could arrive. A single-ship duel. La Sangre del Diablo against HMS Vengeance. The Red Captain against the Admiral sent to destroy him. "It's a trap," Magdalena said flatly when he presented the plan to his officers. "Wells wants you to attack him. He's using himself as bait." "Probably. But what choice do we have? Every day we remain at sea, we grow weaker, every port closes to us, every ally abandons us. If we don't break this siege, we die slowly of starvation and isolation. Better to die fighting. Better still to live by being smarter than your enemy." Redmond smiled. "I've spent 10 years being smarter. Maybe it's time to be bolder." The vote among the crew was nearly unanimous. 81 men chose to engage Wells. Only 6 advocated retreat. They prepared La Sangre del Diablo for battle as she had never been prepared before. Every cannon cleaned and positioned, every yard of rigging checked for weakness, every man given an extra ration of rum and powder. On the appointed day, they sailed to the interception point, a patch of ocean between Barbados and Antigua, where depth, current, and prevailing winds created ideal conditions for naval combat. They waited, sails furled, conserving energy. HMS Vengeance appeared on the horizon 3 hours after dawn. The British fourth rate sailed, with the confidence of institutional power, flag bright against blue sky. Redmond could see through his telescope that Wells had indeed brought no escort. This was to be personal. Both captains understood what this battle represented. For Wells, it was the culmination of a career spent enforcing order upon chaos. For Redmond, it was validation of a decade spent cultivating fear as currency. The winner would be celebrated. The loser would be forgotten. La Sangre del Diablo unfurled her crimson sails and drove toward Vengeance on a perpendicular course, forcing Wells to make the first tactical decision. The British ship turned to bring her broadside to bear. Redmond countered by closing distance rapidly, too fast for the heavier vessel to maneuver effectively. The first exchange of cannon fire shook both ships like earthquakes. Vengeance had superior weight of shot, but La Sangre del Diablo had superior speed and positioning. Redmond's gunners targeted rigging, while Wells's gunners targeted the hull. It was a contest between mobility and durability. For 2 hours they circled and fired, creating a dense cloud of gunpowder smoke that obscured the sun. Men died on both sides, crushed by falling spars, eviscerated by splinters, burned by exploding powder. The sea churned with debris and blood. Then Redmond saw his opening. Vengeance had lost her fore-top-gallant mast, reducing her ability to turn quickly. If he could position La Sangre del Diablo across the British ship's stern and rake her length with cannon fire, he might cripple her beyond recovery. "Hard to starboard. Prepare the starboard guns for full broadside." Marsh executed the order perfectly. The frigate swept around behind Vengeance like a dancer, perfectly positioned for a devastating stern rake. Redmond raised his hand to signal the gunners, but in that instant of anticipated triumph, HMS Vengeance did something unexpected. Her aft cabin windows exploded outward, revealing cannons that had been concealed there specifically for this moment. Wells had sacrificed his personal quarters to create a defensive battery no one would anticipate. The aft cannons fired point-blank into La Sangre del Diablo's bow. Chain shot tore through the foremast, bringing it crashing down across the main deck. Langrage shredded the forward sail crews. Solid shot punched through the frigate's thin planking and destroyed the bow chasers. Redmond felt the deck shift beneath him. His ship, crippled and bleeding, lost her maneuverability. Vengeance turned ponderously, bringing her full broadside to bear on the helpless frigate. "Captain, we must strike colours," Marsh shouted over the screaming wounded. "She'll sink us." But Redmond did not respond to Marsh. He walked calmly to the helm, blood running from a scalp wound he hadn't noticed receiving. Around him, his crew waited for orders that would either save them or consign them to the depths. Magdalena appeared at his elbow. "Erasmus, it's over. Surrender while Wells might still grant quarter." "No quarter for the Red Captain," he said quietly. "You know that." "Then what?" He looked at her with those winter-sea eyes. One last demonstration of power. Before anyone could stop him, Redmond descended to the main deck and stood before his crew. His crimson coat was torn and stained, but he wore it like royal regalia. When he spoke, his voice carried despite the chaos. "Gentlemen, we have two choices. Surrender and hang from British gibbets as entertainment for colonial crowds, or fight until the ocean claims us and become legends. I know which I choose. But you are free men. You decide." The vote required no counting. 73 voices roared defiance. What followed was not battle but slaughter elevated to the level of theatre. La Sangre del Diablo could barely maneuver, but her remaining guns continued firing. Redmond's crew fought with the desperate fury of men who had accepted death. They repelled 2 boarding attempts from Vengeance, throwing the British sailors back with cutlass and pistol fire that turned the water between the ships scarlet. Admiral Wells, watching from his quarterdeck, could not help but feel a grudging respect. These were not mindless criminals, but professionals committed to their craft. The Red Captain had built something extraordinary, a crew that chose shared death over individual survival. But professionalism and courage could not overcome mathematics. Vengeance had more guns, more men, and an intact hull. After another hour of combat, La Sangre del Diablo was listing badly. Her main deck awash with water and blood. Fires burned in 3 locations. Dead men lay piled against the bulwarks. Redmond stood at his helm, coat bright as a wound against the smoke and fire. He saw Magdalena attempting to organize an orderly evacuation, Marsh rallying the last defenders, young men from a dozen nations preparing to die for a cause they had chosen freely. Then he saw Wells across the water, visible through a gap in the smoke, and their eyes met. In that moment, both men understood the truth. Redmond had lost the battle, but won something larger. He had demonstrated that fear, properly cultivated, could make ordinary men extraordinary. Wells had won the battle, but lost the war of symbols. The Red Captain would hang or drown, but his legend would grow larger in death than it ever had in life. Redmond drew his pistol, fired one final shot toward Vengeance that struck nothing, and then turned to his crew. "Gentlemen, it has been an honor. Now abandon ship. Those who can swim, swim. Those who can't, make your peace." "Captain, we stay with the ship," Jonas Blackwood shouted. "No, that's an order. This vessel is my coffin, not yours. Go, live, spend your gold, tell the story." Marsh understood. He began physically throwing men overboard, forcing them to save themselves. Magdalena seized Redmond's arm. "You stubborn bastard. You think dying makes you invincible? I think dying the right way makes me immortal." She kissed him once, hard and bitter, then dove over the rail before he could stop her. Marsh followed, then the remaining crew, until only Erasmus Redmond stood aboard the sinking La Sangre del Diablo. Admiral Wells watched the pirate crew swimming toward flotsam and debris. He could have ordered them shot in the water. Instead, he commanded his men to throw lines to pull survivors aboard for trial and judgment. It was the civilized thing to do, but he did not send lines toward the Red Captain. Some men deserved to choose their own endings. Redmond descended into his flooding cabin one final time. He opened the largest chest of Spanish gold, the personal treasure of the viceroy, still uncounted, still untouched. With water rising around his boots, he removed his crimson coat and carefully folded it, placing it atop the gold. Then he climbed back to the main deck of his dying ship. La Sangre del Diablo was settling by the stern, her bow rising toward the sky. Soon she would slide beneath the Caribbean waves, carrying with her all evidence of the Red Captain's wealth and power. Redmond stood at the helm as water climbed his legs, his chest, his throat. He did not struggle or cry out. He simply watched the horizon, where crimson sails and golden promises faded into memory. Admiral Wells recovered 27 survivors from the battle, including Tobias Marsh and Magdalena de Torres. He transported them to Port Royal, where they faced trial for piracy. Most were hanged. A few turned informant and received pardons. Magdalena negotiated her freedom by revealing the locations of several pirate caches, though she conspicuously omitted any mention of the Viceroy's gold that had sunk with La Sangre del Diablo. The wreck was never found. Over the following decades, treasure hunters searched the waters between Barbados and Antigua, but the Caribbean is vast and the ocean keeps its secrets well. Some said the Red Captain had scuttled his ship over a deep trench where recovery was impossible. Others claimed the gold was cursed, protected by the spirit of the man who had wielded fear like a weapon. What survived was the story. In taverns from Boston to Buenos Aires, sailors and soldiers told tales of the Red Captain, how gold had made him powerful, how fear had made him fatal, how he had chosen death over surrender and become more dangerous as legend than he ever had been as man. Years later, a fisherman working the reef south of Antigua pulled up something unusual in his nets. A tattered piece of scarlet cloth, salt-rotted and sun-faded but still recognizable. He showed it to an old sailor in a waterfront tavern, a man with Welsh accent and scars, who wept when he saw it. "That's the captain's coat," Tobias Marsh whispered. "He's still out there even now. Gold made him powerful, fear made him fatal, but the ocean made him eternal." The fisherman tried to sell the cloth, thinking some collector might pay for a relic of the Red Captain, but when he woke the next morning, the scarlet fragment had vanished from his locked room, leaving only a damp spot on the table and the faint smell of gunpowder and sea salt. Some things, it seemed, belonged to the deep and would not be possessed.